What's going on, guys? It's Mr. Collins here, bringing you episode number 2 of my podcast, Let's Talk History. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at Veterans Day, and we're going to be getting some different perspectives on Veterans Day. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at a student's perspective of Veterans Day, my perspective as a history teacher on Veterans Day, and we're actually going to get a special guest, another teacher, and their perspective on Veterans Day as a veteran themselves. So let's go ahead and jump right into the episode. All right, guys. So I got one of my students here. This is Nick. Introduce yourself, Nick.
I'm Nick.
Hey, Nick. So we want to talk to you about what exactly Veterans Day is and how it began and how it grew into the holiday that it is today. So under FDR's administration in 1938, you have the signage of Armistice Day as a national holiday into effect. And this was a day that was meant to recognize the people who had formerly served in our military as a national holiday.
And in 1954, under the Eisenhower administration, it was changed to Veterans Day.
Yeah, so you've got two sections of its history, going from Armistice Day to Veterans Day that shows you that it didn't just always stay, Veterans Day or Armistice Day. It's been a ever-evolving holiday that people have looked at. So let's go ahead and jump into what exactly it means to the individual. So to me, as a history teacher, I teach about it in my class, and we talk about, what it means to students. So let's go ahead and get that firsthand account as to what it means to one of my students. So Nick?
Well, in Veterans Day, my family likes to honor my great uncle because he fought in World War II and in all throughout the Vietnam War, and he was an engineer, and he was in the midst of the battle fixing the radios and stuff. And every single Veterans Day, we usually like to make his favorite dessert and just honor him.
Awesome. And what was the name of that dessert?
Butterfinger dessert.
That sounds awesome.
It also boosts my respect for all military personnel and people in the military.
Absolutely. That's definitely an issue we have is, making sure that, there is that high respect for veterans, because as most know, being a veteran isn't an easy job. Even serving some time in the military, then getting out, the mental illness and just the issues and complications that can arise just from seeing some of those horrific things, it's detrimental. So there definitely should be a day, at least a day, to recognize, what this means to everybody and to honor those who served. So anything else you'd like to add?
No.
All right, then we're signing off. All right, guys, so I'm here with Mr. Stephen Lovelace. He's our computer tech teacher here at Knox County Middle School. And this is really just to give us an idea of what Veterans Day, this national holiday, is like from the perspective of a veteran themselves. So, Mr. Lovelace.
Veterans Day. So I served from 2002 until 2016 in the United States Navy. Veterans Day for me it was really nice. And I really appreciate everybody that honors veterans. Take for instance, my dad served. He served during the Vietnam War. And for him, Veterans Day still is a little rough. Like it strikes a nerve. Just because simply, like we talked about earlier, you said Roosevelt initiated the, was it Roosevelt or?
Roosevelt in 38 signed it into law.
Signed it into law.
Yeah.
And so this was during, I want to say, right after the World War I in 1938. So it was after World War I when all those guys come back. And you look at before 1938, when America would go to war, it had the population of America behind them. Mm-hmm. Like, our boys are over there fighting, we need to support them. And then you take World War II, that was great. Korean War started slacking off. Vietnam War, America seemed to hate our troops.
The population at home really had an issue
at home
with it.
Had an issue with the war and took it out on our troops.
Yep.
So like when I come back from deployments, there was always parades, welcome home celebration. You got, everybody joined in, made big dinners. We had like a celebration. Mm-hmm. My dad told me one or two stories, not a lot. He come home, a baby killer, throwing eggs at him. It was rough for him,
Yeah.
And then you have to think too, nowadays we have a lot of stuff for PTSD for veterans, the mental health, stuff like that. Before Vietnam, they didn't have that.
Yeah.
It wasn't until shortly after Vietnam, I want to say 1980, the term PTSD actually started getting recognized. And it's not even until today they start really recognizing PTSD. And you don't know you have PTSD until sometimes it's too late.
Yeah.
So, but Veterans Day is, it's a celebration about what veterans did for our country.
Yeah.
Not just saying, hey, I served, it's about what you did, what you stood for, the sacrifices they made.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that I sacrificed any, and I didn't have it as rough as my dad did.
Mm-hmm.
He sacrificed.
But you did, though. That time away from your family, though.
Yes, it is a lot of time
That's
away.
definitely a sacrifice in my book.
Yeah, and when you sign into the military and you go on deployment, it's 100% sacrifice because you're gone. I remember times being deployed, something would go down and we would go Whiskey River, right? No communications, no email, no phones, nothing. You couldn't talk. And I think it lasted for maybe about 60 days, a little bit over 60 days. This is back when we were fighting ISIS. Like when we started bombing ISIS, Obama had approved a strike on ISIS.
Yeah.
And so before that happened, we started ramping up. Before, he was getting ready to do the approval, so we started ramping up. So to keep us or keep anybody from leaking information, they shut it down.
Yeah.
And so it is a big sacrifice because back home, your family's like, well, why isn't he talking to me? Now they're worried. It's a big deal. It's a lot of sacrifice, not only for the member, but for the member's family. And if you don't have a good family behind you supporting you, it makes it rough out there.
And a lot of people don't have that luxury of having that support at home. I mean, just the numbers of divorces that happen within people who are military. Or
It was the divorce rate in the military is outrageous. I'm in that statistic. I got divorced in the military.
Yeah.
And then while I was in the military, I did meet my current wife, great woman.
Yeah.
But it was that military sacrifice that not everybody can make.
Yeah.
And it's rough. It takes a toll on you.
It is. And going back to what you were saying about PTSD and how it really wasn't called that until 1980, there were still, I guess you could say, names for what people were experiencing, but it didn't really become that big issue until the 1980s.
Yeah.
I believe in the Civil War it was called soldier's fatigue.
Yeah.
And in the Great War it was called shell shock.
Yeah.
And then it wasn't until, the 1980s that we started saying, like, okay, there's a lot of people psychologically messed up from these wars overseas, and maybe we should look a little further into that. And there probably isn't a war more psychological than Vietnam.
Yeah.
I mean, you had kids and women of the Viet Cong actually fighting our troops that were going over there. And to our troops, I mean, that's just so out there.
It's detrimental.
Because up until that point, to them, I mean, it was man versus man. Just imagine putting yourself in the shoes of somebody having to take the life of a child.
Oh yeah.
And I guess detriment that would do to your psyche. Very, very sad. Very sad.
Oh yeah. And I'm not going to speak bad about the military at all. I love the military.
Mm-hmm.
But I am going to tell you one thing that happens, and I don't know if this is factually true.
Yeah.
It's just an outside observation I've seen.
Yeah.
All right. So when we go to war against somebody, it doesn't matter what it is. The military produces and pushes a hate into troops.
Yeah.
Because how can you justify fighting somebody and taking a life without that hate?
Yeah.
You can't do it. It's almost impossible to push that button without that hate. And then they come back to the States and want to know why you have this hate.
Exactly.
And so in their own way, they create that monster.
Yeah.
And understandably so. Now, I was fortunate enough not to be in hand-to-hand combat, never had to use a weapon. I was a mechanic, so I worked on jets that delivered weapons.
Yeah.
But, to be that pilot, to, have to push that button.
Yeah.
You know, and you're following orders. It's drilled into you to follow orders.
And that's a big thing too, is just following orders. You've probably heard the song War Pigs by Black Sabbath.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, people are pawns in chess. You know, the government is just controlling everything. They're pressing that button, and you guys have to follow the orders, regardless of what it is. It's your job.
And something crazy, you know, technology's pushed so much. I teach technology.
Yeah.
Technology's pushed so much to the point that, you know, you have drones. And let's say that drone operator doesn't want to push that button because it's unsafe.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't matter. You're sitting next to him and you want to push the button. You push the button if you're in charge.
Because it's orders.
He doesn't even have to do it. You can take over.
Yeah.
Because you take, for instance, the new jets.
Yeah.
Right? Let's say it's unsafe for a pilot to land on the plane because of his health reasons. He's not in full control. There's people on the ship that can take over controls of that jet and land it on the ship.
Yeah.
They can take over that jet and launch the missile without you even knowing it. I mean, you have no control. It's just so much technology has taken over to that part because of trying to erase hate. Like, to the point where, you know, if a pilot's up there and he doesn't really want to because he doesn't like the situation, it doesn't matter now. Because technology can take over.
You're exactly right.
And it's crazy.
That's a scary thing. And going off technology, I mean, that's something that we've discussed in my class. Going all the way back to the Roman Empire, you know, the advances in technology were roads. I mean, just being able to mobilize your troops from point A to point B, and the Romans did it very well. Being able to get from point A to point B faster than the opposing side, you were in business. You were fighting them, and you were going to conquer them just because you got there faster. You had more time to set up.
Yeah.
Nowadays, like Mr. Lovelace was saying, it's really just the press of a button anymore.
Oh, yeah.
You've got drones, all kinds of weapons, technology, and it's a scary thing.
Oh, yeah. And, but back to sorry, I took us off on a tangent.
No, you're
there,
fine. You're fine.
But back to the Veterans Day. It's great. We live in a small town, Barberville, Kentucky. They love veterans.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you drive down the street right now, you'll see pictures of past veterans, current veterans. You'll see flags everywhere. It's great that they have that celebration of remembering the sacrifices that veterans did.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of Veterans Day. It's not to glorify what they did, but to honor their sacrifice of what they did.
Yeah, for what they had to do.
What they had to do, yes.
Yeah.
That's definitely true.
Absolutely. So I guess to bring it full circle, that word sacrifice, I mean, it just says it all within Veterans Day. You know, regardless of what war you served in, what you had to do, I mean, it was part of the job. And you have to just be honorable towards those people who served. And I thank you for serving your time in the military, taking those sacrifices, because even as he said, even though he didn't have a weapon in hand out there fighting, those sacrifices took place at home. And that's still a big deal, in my opinion, and in many people's opinions. So I thank you
I appreciate it.
for what you did. And I thank you guys for tuning in and taking the time to listen to these different perspectives. So just to bring it again, we have a perspective of me as a history teacher. We have the perspective of a student who has a family who spends different Veterans Days having these traditions. And then we have the perspective of an actual veteran himself here. And he's just one of many. There are many other veterans in the school. Can you think of any other? There's Janet, there's Miss Jones.
Yeah, Miss Jones was a veteran. I can't remember his name over in the
but just many people that we have in our community and in our school, you know, just this little school that we have. So many people serving and giving those sacrifices.
Yeah, no, Anthony Parsons is here.
Yeah.
He's the ROTC teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And each of them have their own individual sacrifices that they made, whether that was in combat or back here in Kentucky. And for those of you watching that may be a veteran, we thank you too, because we know you gave those sacrifices as well. So that's us signing out.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, guys, I appreciate you tuning into this episode of Let's Talk History. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, share it with your friends, like the video, and as always, keep learning history.